Hello and welcome to AP News. I'm Matthew O'Connor and today we have a very special segment to share with you called the Progressive News. We will be answering the important question of, did reform define the Progressive Era? Let's go over to our correspondents Amy Zamora and Paige Ackerman to find out. The Progressive Era was a time period spanning from 1890 to 1920 which held much social advocacy and many political movements. Many consider the Progressive Era to be a prime time period in American history of significant changes throughout the nation. The people who triggered these movements, or progressives, mainly lived in cities. This is why most of the movements were largely popular in highly populated cities. These progressive movements focus on improving several aspects of society, which included the treatment of specific groups, such as women and children, education, and prohibition. Other progressive movements worked towards creating a country that would have the restriction of rights with certain groups, such as immigrants.
The women's rights movement began to pick up speed after the Civil War had ended. In 1872, for work rights, Congress passed a law to guarantee women federal workers equal pay for equal work. Even though that equal concept wasn't accepted, women were more openly allowed into the workforce and took up jobs in factories and mills, even more so as the new war approached. Through World War I, during the Progressive Era, women's crucial role in manufacturing solidified their capability to be accepted members of the workforce. At the start of the Progressive Era, the suffrage movement was still going strong. When the 15th Amendment was passed after the Civil War, the fine lines did not specifically include women in the right to vote. With outrage, the strong leaders of the movement, including Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, fought hard to make sure women would gain the same rights that blacks had gained through the amendment. They thought, if blacks could have rights, why couldn't women? Congress soon received a proposal which involved the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, which would have granted women suffrage in 1878. Although it was denied, women still fought passionately for that valued right to vote. 12 years later, during the Progressive Era itself, women were still fighting for their suffrage. The National American Women's Suffrage Association at this point was changing its approach on suffrage. Instead of claiming their equality to men, the organization and its members claimed that they should vote because they were different from men and could bring a new aspect and point of view to the American politics. As time passed, states slowly began to accept women into the voting world. By the end of the 1800s, Idaho and Utah already had given women the right to vote. Although World War I slowed down the movement, women working for the war cause led the nation to believe that their devout patriotic devotion to the nation made them deserving of suffrage. Finally, in August of 1920, women had gained the right to vote with the 19th Amendment.
During the Progressive Era, the worry over workplace conditions, and thus the treatment of the working class, was increasing. Reformers at this point were most concerned about how these conditions were treating the child laborers and if it was too dangerous for them. Over 1 million of the nation's children were working, and progressives decided that the conditions which they were subjected to were not adequate and that their workplace treatment was disagreeable. Progressives believed that child labor was detrimental to their growth and that these children would be incapable of being healthy adults by working in such conditions. In 1904, the National Labor Committee was founded to ban child labor in the workplace. Although many other bills were passed, including the 1906 Child Labor Law, which made the minimum work age 14, none could trump child labor, and several were deemed unconstitutional later. This was just the beginning of child labor reform, which would grow as time went on.
Prior to the progressive education movement, Southern children received as little as 6 years of schooling, attending only 3 to 4 months per year due to the high agricultural demand. Schools were very poorly funded and would sometimes be condemned due to the deplorable conditions. Progressives believed that education was the way to fix everything un-American. Thus, they stressed the need for a proper, structured education. Wanting this, they strived to get an education up to par so Americans could thrive later on in life. With constant pressure over much-needed reform, Congress passed several bills which allowed for tax-based funding, agricultural schools, vocational schools, mandated school attendance, and better teachers. The movement received much help from philanthropists like John Rockefeller, who gave more than $53 million to support Southern schools to help improve the conditions of public education. Towards the end of the Progressive Era, the change in education quality was seen. The average school term length was expanded from 112 days to 145 days. The individual expenditure in Georgia increased from 89 cents in 1900 to $3.13 in 1920, and white teacher salaries greatly rose. The temperance movement had been active since the early 1800s, fighting against the use of alcoholic beverages. Alcohol at many times was associated with poverty and created a negative image of certain groups who were actively drinking in society. By the early 20th century, Prohibition was a national movement. Progressives specifically were concerned with the morality of society. Without alcoholic influence, the people of America could make better decisions and avoid social and political corruption. Prohibitionists themselves mostly believed that the banning of alcohol could never be enforced. They thought that only the dangerous consequences for possessing, selling, or drinking alcohol would keep people from partaking in it. The United States' entrance into World War I helped finalize the changes which prohibitionists were passively trying to make. In 1918, the 18th Amendment was passed. Through this, the manufacture, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages was prohibited.
The movement against minorities began to be seen on the national level in the Progressive era as well. Progressive and union workers, in conjunction, agreed with the need to restrict further European and Asian immigration from entering the United States. A majority of these immigrants at the time were from southeastern Europe. These immigrants did not support the Union, and their influx of immigration created a greater need for labor, which would lower wages in the workforce. This was seen through the Gentlemen's Agreement, where Japan agreed to limit the number of workers coming into the U.S. The Dillingham Commission produced a report outlining the serious threat that immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe posed to the United States. This report was a major stepping stone that led to the immigration reduction laws that would soon be passed in the 1920s. The minor Native American population was also pushed against in the progressive movement against minorities. The Dawes Act gave leftover land in the West to the Native Americans, but forced them to accept American culture if they took the land. Legislation during the Progressive era caused thousands of Native Americans to become landless and to lose their cultural livelihoods altogether.
And now back to Matthew for our conclusion.
Overall, reform defined the Progressive era. It created long-lasting changes that are still seen in today's society. Reform in this era helped shape our nation together as a whole. The nation was bringing forth new ways to become more unified, such as including women in voting. That's all we have for this segment of Progressive News. Now to Phil with the sports.